there's all sorts of ways of starting this, starting a presentation like this to summarize decades of your life in a few minutes, but I'll do my best here. And I think I'll move back to a critical movement, a critical moment back in 1999. I was giving a talk at Brandeis University. I was a speaker there, and they asked me to talk about my history with microcredit, which, as Laurie said, started in 1980. And I'll go in a little bit. And then, and then the next speaker started talking about savings, and this marked the beginning of my transition from microfinance to micro savings. And I'll tell you a little bit about that history, but to give you a context, let me just start with the origins of this, the microcredit movement, since we were there in the beginning of it, all the way back then. With Ashe, I was the director of something called the Pisces Project, and we had teams and we went to 14 countries. We looked at all the ways that credit was extended to micro businesses in around the world. A lot of experience there, most of it pretty bad, but among the detritus of failed and poorly conceived efforts, we found a real gem in El Salvador, and this was the solidarity group methodology that had been pioneered, actually, we certainly didn't invent it, back in the 1950s by a credit union called Fedicredito in El Salvador. So in 1980, or 1979 more accurately, in the middle of the war there, my colleague and I, Peter Fraser, went and studied how these groups work. How is it possible? And because this is the first breakthrough that showed that it is possible to make loans to tiny businesses, get the loans paid back, and cover the operating costs of the operation at local operations. So we went in there as trucks were going in there, full of soldiers, and the fighting was going on between the leftist guerrillas and the government forces, and we'll go into the politics of that. But so we started finding these little groups. They had been doing this, and so it was a tremendous breakthrough. Instead of a bank deciding on who would get a loan and how much, and doing a loan review, all that, the simple notion was a group of 5 would form up of people that trusted each other. They would receive a little training. They would choose who receives the loan. They did all the selection themselves. And as long as, with no review done by the institution, Fedicredito, and as long as everybody was up to date in their payments, they would get more loans, with the loans getting bigger at each stage. So they started out very small and went up. So I was flabbergasted. And not only this is a loan mechanism, to me, the fascinating thing was the solidarity part of it, because in these little groups of 5, we found a tremendous amount of mutual support, developing mutual marketing, using each other's product, helping each other out, bailing each other out if they couldn't make a payment, and all that sort of thing. So there's an enormous amount. This whole system was based on social capital in the context. So that worked well. And as Laurie said, we took the introduced at the Acción in the face of total and utter skepticism. I'll say that this guy has gone completely off his rocker, but let's try this out in the Dominican Republic with these groups of Fritiqueros. And to make a long story short, I ended up doing this and promoting this kind of project in 34 countries in Africa and Asia and throughout Eastern Europe, and also most significantly brought it to the United States to an initiative called Working Capital, where we use the same mechanisms to do groups coming together, even in rural New Hampshire, where the motto is live free or die. These groups came together, solidarity, they made their loans, they progressed and the like. So I was good, but even by then, by the late 90s, I was getting skeptical. This thing that we started, I was starting to feel increasingly uncomfortable, because I went to Bolivia, where it was one of the major places where microcredit really got started through Banco Sol and the others. And I could see that what had happened, it kind of created a monster, because around all the markets, there was kind of like standing like vultures all the way around, all these microfinance institutions, all descending upon the market vendors, and each of them providing loans and fighting among themselves. And there was And later, when I started looking around, I go into every village and there's 5, 6, 7, 8 microfinance institutions fighting for the same customers, multiple loans, getting people in debt. And I said, I've had it. You know, I've helped get this started, but I've gone to the end of my rope. So then into this meeting, the next person that stood up was a woman by the name of Marcia Odell. And she said, well, you know, we have this program called Worth in Nepal. We've been there for a year and a half. We're working through 100 local partners. We have 120,000 poor village women organized into 6,500 groups. And I said, my God, you know, this is no microfinance program. Has ever been able to do this? So many people, so much. So I've got to be the evaluator of this program. And this, so I cobbled together funding from different sources, evaluated that project, and that rewired my brain from credit is a human right, people go into debt, get out of poverty, to you got to mobilize savings, because the savings in the context of a group that supports you really is the first step of, without the burden of being in debt, you can have your savings, people help each other out, you're fomenting community projects, and the empowerment was palpable. As I went through, I get brand new groups, and the women could barely say their names. My name is so on and so forth. And you see a group a year or two later, and they were all had questions, and they were debating, and they were making loan decisions. And so that started, so my brain got rewired there. And the basic idea was also social capital. You remember the concept of social capital in the Dominican, well, solidarity groups. Well, here it is, but there was no external loan fund, because all the money was generated through the savings of the members. The loans went out to members, approved by each other. They were paid back at a very high rate, and this led to the program. So I took that. Now the next way I went to look at the self-help groups of India, then on to Zimbabwe, and saw that these groups were surviving and thriving with incredible adaptability in the face of 500, 600% inflation per year. So it was just tremendous. And with that, I cobbled this together, and Gloria said, I went and took all this experience from Nepal and India and Zimbabwe and cobbled together and started Saving for Change with Oxfam America in 2004. And so we ended up with 35,000 groups, 28 local partners using a simple replicable methodology. All the training went out, and these groups, after years after support had dried up for the groups, a study been done just recently showed that 79% of the groups trained 7 to 10 years before are still operating, and through spontaneous replication. And this is a great part of this methodology. The idea is spread spontaneously as group leaders of existing groups train new ones, and on it goes. And the same pattern is that we find in Nepal and all sorts of other countries. So that brings me up to the next phase, which is, okay, this is great, but it takes a lot of effort and time and training to get a solid, and got to overcome a lot of suspicion. And I became more and more aware of all the informal groups, the Susus, the Tontins, the Pasanakus, the little groups of rotating savings groups where 20 people would come together, and with all sorts of variation, with tremendous sophistication, they were taking care of the business. And even though, so then I kind of moved on to the next stage, which comes to the next question. I can tell a little bit. Gloria, you have a question about the informal sector, and then I can tell a little bit about that, and then we can go into the details here.